Sarah Chen wiped the sweat from her hands as she finished tuning the last piano key. The sound echoed through the empty Grand Metropolitan Theater. She had been working there for 3 years now, fixing and tuning pianos. Most people did not even notice her. She was just the quiet woman who worked backstage. At 28 years old, Sarah had small hands but strong fingers. Years of working with piano strings had made them rough and calloused. She wore simple clothes, usually dark pants and a plain shirt. Her long black hair was always tied back in a neat ponytail. Sarah liked to stay invisible. She did her job well and went home quietly each day. The theater was getting ready for its biggest event of the year. The annual charity gala would happen tonight. Rich people from all over the city would come. They would eat fancy food, drink expensive wine, and watch talented performers. The money raised would help sick children in local hospitals. Sarah had seen many of these events from backstage. She watched famous singers, dancers, and musicians perform. Sometimes she wished she could be up there too. But that was just a dream. Sarah had learned long ago that dreams could be dangerous. She remembered being a young girl sitting at her grandmother's old piano. Her grandmother had taught her to play when she was only 5 years old. "You have special fingers, little one," her grandmother used to say. "Music lives in your hands." Sarah had believed her grandmother. She practiced every day after school. Other kids played outside, but Sarah played piano. She learned difficult songs that even older students could not play. Her teacher said she was gifted. They said she could become a famous pianist one day. In high school, Sarah won every music contest. She got a scholarship to study music in college. Everyone expected great things from her. Sarah expected great things too. She dreamed of playing in big concert halls, wearing beautiful dresses and making people cry with her music. But college was different. There were many talented students there. The pressure was intense. Sarah had to perform in front of judges and classrooms full of people. Each time she walked onto a stage, her heart would beat so fast she thought it might explode. The worst day came during her junior year. Sarah was supposed to play a difficult piece by Chopin in front of the whole music department. She had practiced for months. She knew every note perfectly, but when she sat down at the piano and saw all those faces watching her, something terrible happened. Her hands started shaking. She could not control them. She began playing, but her fingers hit wrong keys. The beautiful music she had practiced became ugly noise. People in the audience looked uncomfortable. Some whispered to each other. Sarah tried to keep going, but the shaking got worse. Finally, she stopped playing and ran off the stage. She could hear people talking behind her. Some sounded sorry for her. Others sounded disappointed. Sarah locked herself in a bathroom and cried for 2 hours. After that day, Sarah could not perform anymore. Every time she tried to play for other people, the same thing happened. Her hands would shake. Her heart would race, and she would feel sick. The doctors called it performance anxiety. They gave her medicine and sent her to therapy. Nothing helped. Sarah had to leave music school. She was too embarrassed to go back home where everyone expected her to be a star. Instead, she moved to a new city and found work fixing pianos. It was not what she had dreamed of, but at least she could still be around music. Working at the Grand Metropolitan Theater was not a bad job. The pay was decent, and Sarah liked the old building. It had been built over 100 years ago. The walls were covered with pictures of famous performers from long ago. Sometimes Sarah would look at those pictures and wonder what it felt like to be so confident on stage. Most days were quiet. Sarah would arrive early in the morning and check all the pianos. She would tune them, fix broken keys, and make sure they sounded perfect. The musicians who used them barely spoke to her. She was just part of the background, like the stage lights or the red curtains. Today was different, though. Sarah could feel the excitement in the air. Workers were setting up tables for the gala dinner. Florists were arranging huge bouquets of flowers. The kitchen staff was preparing fancy food. Everyone was busy getting ready for the big night. Sarah was finishing her work when she heard fast footsteps behind her. She turned around and saw Mrs. Anderson, the event coordinator. Mrs. Anderson was a thin woman who always looked stressed. Today, she looked more worried than usual. "Sarah," Mrs. Anderson called out, slightly out of breath. Thank goodness you're still here. We have a big problem. Sarah put down her tools and looked at Mrs. Anderson with concern. Problems at the theater usually meant extra work for everyone. What's wrong? Sarah asked. Mrs. Anderson ran her hands through her gray hair. It's David, our piano accompanist. He was supposed to play for all the singers tonight. Sarah nodded. She knew David well. He was a talented musician who had worked at the theater for many years. He could play any song perfectly and never seemed nervous about performing. He's in the hospital, Mrs. Anderson continued. Food poisoning. The doctors say he'll be fine, but he definitely can't perform tonight. The gala starts in 4 hours, and we have 3 singers who need piano accompaniment. Sarah felt sorry for David, but she was not sure why Mrs. Anderson was telling her this. There was nothing Sarah could do to help with the performances. Mrs. Anderson looked directly at Sarah with desperate eyes. I've called every pianist I know. Nobody is available on such short notice. Then I remembered, you work with pianos all day. You must know how to play them, right? Sarah's stomach suddenly felt heavy. She could see where this conversation was going, and she did not like it. I do know how to play, Sarah said quietly. But I don't perform for people anymore. I just tune pianos now. Mrs. Anderson stepped closer. Please, Sarah, I'm begging you, you don't have to play anything complicated. Just simple accompaniment. The singers will do most of the work. You'll barely be noticed. Sarah's hands started to feel sweaty just thinking about it. The idea of sitting at a piano in front of hundreds of people made her feel sick. She remembered that awful day in college when everything went wrong. I can't, Sarah said, shaking her head. I'm sorry, but I really can't perform for people. Maybe you could find recorded music to play instead. Mrs. Anderson looked like she might cry. The singers specifically need live piano. Recorded music won't work for what they're doing. Sarah, I know this is asking a lot, but hundreds of people will be here tonight. Important people who donate a lot of money to help sick children. If we cancel the musical performances, we might lose thousands of dollars in donations. Sarah thought about the sick children who would not get help if the fundraiser failed. She thought about all the disappointed people who had paid good money for tickets. But she also thought about her shaking hands and the embarrassment she had felt years ago. What kind of music would I need to play? Sarah asked, though she was not sure why she was even considering it. Mrs. Anderson's face lit up with hope. Simple stuff, really. Maybe some background music during dinner. And then accompaniment for 3 songs. Nothing too fancy. Just basic piano playing to support the singers. Sarah looked around the empty theater. In a few hours it would be full of people. Rich, important people who expected professional entertainment. What if she messed up again? What if her hands started shaking, and she ruined everything? But then she thought about her grandmother who had always believed in her. Her grandmother had died 2 years ago, and Sarah still missed her terribly. What would she say if she knew Sarah had a chance to help children and was too scared to try? Okay, Sarah said quietly, surprising herself. I'll do it, but I can't promise it will be perfect. Mrs. Anderson clapped her hands together with relief. Oh, thank you, Sarah. You're saving the entire event. Don't worry about being perfect. Just play from your heart, and everything will be fine. As Mrs. Anderson hurried away to tell the singers about the change in plans, Sarah stood alone in the theater. She looked at the grand piano on the stage. In a few hours, she would be sitting there with hundreds of pairs of eyes watching her. Sarah's hands were already starting to shake. Sarah walked slowly toward the stage where the grand piano waited. Her heart was beating fast and her palms felt sweaty. She had agreed to help, but now she was starting to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. The theater was getting busier by the minute. Workers were setting up chairs for the audience. The lighting crew was testing different colored lights. Everything looked fancy and professional. Sarah felt very small and out of place. She sat down at the piano bench and lifted the lid to reveal the black and white keys. These keys were old friends to her. She had tuned this piano many times, but she had never actually played it for an audience. Her fingers touched the keys gently, making soft sounds that echoed in the empty theater. Are you the replacement pianist? Sarah looked up, and saw a tall woman with dark hair walking toward her. The woman wore an expensive-looking red dress and carried herself like she was very important. Sarah could tell right away that this person was used to being the center of attention. "Yes," Sarah said quietly. "I'm Sarah. I work here as a piano tuner." The woman's eyebrows went up in surprise. "A piano tuner? Mrs. Anderson told me she found a pianist, not a tuner. I'm Maria Gonzalez. I'm the main singer for tonight's performance." Sarah had heard of Maria Gonzalez. She was a famous opera singer who had performed all over the world. Rich people paid hundreds of dollars just to hear her sing. Sarah suddenly felt even more nervous. "Don't worry," Sarah said, trying to sound confident. "I know how to play piano. I studied music in college." Maria looked at Sarah's simple clothes and rough hands. She did not look impressed. "What pieces are we performing tonight?" "I was told I would be singing O mio babbino caro from the opera Gianni Schicchi. It's a very difficult piece that requires expert accompaniment." Sarah's heart sank. She knew that song well. It was one of the most challenging pieces for both singer and piano player. She had played it in college, but that was years ago. And it required the kind of skill that she was not sure she still had. I haven't played that piece in a while," Sarah admitted. "Maybe we could choose something easier?" Maria's face showed her displeasure. "Easier? The program has already been printed. The audience is expecting to hear Puccini tonight. This is a charity gala for sick children, not some amateur night at a local restaurant." Other people were starting to gather around them. Sarah could see 2 more singers waiting to talk to her. They all looked worried about the change in plans. "Let's just try a quick rehearsal," Maria said, clearly not happy about the situation. "We have about an hour before people start arriving for dinner. Maybe you'll remember how to play it." Sarah's hands were already starting to shake a little, but she tried to hide it. She opened the sheet music that Maria handed her. The notes looked familiar, but they also looked very complicated. There were fast runs of notes, difficult chord changes, and precise timing required to match the singer's voice. "Whenever you're ready," Maria said, standing beside the piano in her performance position. Sarah took a deep breath and placed her fingers on the keys. She started playing the opening notes. At first, everything seemed okay. The music sounded right, and Maria began to sing along. But as the piece got more difficult, Sarah started making mistakes. Her left hand missed a bass note. Then her right hand stumbled over a quick passage. The timing between her playing and Maria's singing started to fall apart. Sarah could feel herself getting more nervous, which made her make even more mistakes. Maria stopped singing and looked at Sarah with concern. "Stop, please. This isn't working." Sarah's face turned red with embarrassment. She could feel other people staring at her. The 2 other singers whispered to each other and shook their heads. Sarah wanted to disappear. "I'm sorry," Sarah said quietly. "I told Mrs. Anderson that I don't perform anymore. Maybe you should find recorded music instead." Maria sighed and looked frustrated. "There's no time to change everything now. The donors are expecting a live performance. Let me call my usual accompanist in New York. Maybe he can catch a flight here." While Maria made phone calls, Sarah sat at the piano feeling terrible. She had promised to help, but she was only making things worse. The other 2 singers, a young man named Robert and an older woman named Catherine, came over to talk to her. "Don't feel bad," Robert said kindly. "That piece is really hard. Even professional pianists have trouble with it sometimes." Catherine nodded in agreement. "Maybe we could choose different songs. I know some simpler pieces that would still sound beautiful." Sarah appreciated their kindness, but she could see the worry in their eyes. Everyone was trying to be nice, but they all knew that the evening might be ruined because of her. Maria came back from making her phone calls. She did not look happy. "My accompanist can't get here in time. All the flights are booked. It looks like you're our only option, Sarah." The weight of responsibility felt heavy on Sarah's shoulders. She thought about all the people who would be disappointed if the musical performances were canceled. She thought about the sick children who needed the money that would be raised tonight. "What if we practice the pieces more?" Sarah suggested. "Maybe if I play through them a few times, I'll remember better. Maria looked at her watch. We have 45 minutes before the guests start arriving. That's not much time, but I suppose we have to try. For the next 30 minutes, Sarah practiced with the three singers. She played through all the songs they had planned for the evening. Some parts went better than others. Robert's song was easier, and Sarah could handle it without too many problems. Catherine's piece was medium difficulty, and Sarah made only a few small mistakes. But Maria's song was still very hard. No matter how many times they practiced it, Sarah kept making errors in the same places. Her timing was off, and her fingers seemed to forget where to go during the fast parts. This is hopeless, Maria said after their fourth attempt. The audience will notice every mistake. These people know good music when they hear it. Sarah felt like crying, but she tried to stay calm. What if I simplify some parts? Instead of playing all the fancy notes, I could just play the main melody and basic chords. Maria shook her head. That would change the whole feeling of the piece. O mio babino caro is supposed to be rich and dramatic. If you simplify it too much, it will sound like elevator music. Sarah looked at the sheet music again. She could see all the places where she was making mistakes. Most of them were in the decorative parts, the fancy runs and complicated chords that made the song sound professional. The basic melody was simple enough for her to play. What if we think of this differently? Catherine suggested. Instead of trying to play it exactly like the original, what if Sarah plays it in her own style? Sometimes simpler can be more beautiful. Maria looked doubtful. I don't know. The audience is expecting a certain level of quality. Sarah was starting to feel desperate. Please, let me try it one more time. But this time, I won't worry about playing every single note perfectly. I'll just focus on supporting your voice and making the song sound beautiful in a simple way. Maria sighed. Fine, one more try. But if it doesn't work, we'll have to cancel the musical portion of the evening. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment and tried to remember what her grandmother used to tell her. Music isn't about showing off, her grandmother would say. It's about touching people's hearts. Play with love, not with fear. Sarah opened her eyes and put her fingers on the keys. Instead of trying to play every complicated note perfectly, she focused on the feeling of the song. She played the melody clearly and added simple but beautiful harmonies. When she came to the difficult parts, she played them more slowly and gently instead of trying to race through them. Something was different this time. The music sounded softer and more emotional. Maria began to sing, and her voice seemed to blend perfectly with Sarah's simpler style of playing. Instead of competing with the piano, Maria's voice floated on top of it like a bird riding on a gentle breeze. When they finished, everyone was quiet for a moment. Then Robert started clapping. That was beautiful, he said. It sounded different from the original, but it was really moving. Catherine nodded enthusiastically. I got goosebumps listening to that. Sarah, you made the song sound more personal somehow. Even Maria looked surprised. That was actually quite good. It wasn't what I expected, but it had a lot of feeling to it. Maybe this could work after all. Sarah felt a tiny bit of hope growing in her chest. Maybe she could do this after all. Maybe her grandmother was right. Music was about touching hearts, not about playing perfectly. But then she looked out at the theater and saw the first guests beginning to arrive. Well-dressed people were walking through the lobby, talking and laughing. Soon, hundreds of them would be sitting in those seats, looking up at her. Sarah's hands started to shake again. Playing for 3 people backstage was one thing. Playing for a crowd of strangers was something completely different. I think I need some air, Sarah said, standing up from the piano bench. She walked toward the back door of the theater, her legs feeling weak. In less than 2 hours, she would have to walk onto that stage in front of all those people. Her college nightmare might happen all over again. Sarah pushed open the back door and stepped into the cool evening air. She leaned against the brick wall and tried to calm down. Sarah stood outside the theater, breathing in the cool evening air. Her heart was still beating fast and her hands felt shaky. She could hear the sounds of the city around her, cars driving by, people talking as they walked past, and the distant sound of music from a restaurant down the street. All of these normal sounds made her feel a little calmer. She looked at her watch. 1 hour and 15 minutes until showtime. The guests were already starting to arrive for the dinner portion of the evening. Through the theater windows, she could see people in fancy clothes walking around with wine glasses in their hands. Sarah tried to imagine herself sitting at the piano in front of all those people. Every time she pictured it, her stomach felt sick. She remembered that terrible day in college when she had run off the stage in embarrassment. What if the same thing happened tonight? What if she froze up and couldn't play at all? She walked a few steps away from the theater and sat down on a small bench that was placed between two street lamps. The bench was old and worn, probably used by people waiting for buses. Sarah was grateful for a quiet place to sit and think. A few minutes later, she heard footsteps behind her. Sarah turned around and saw Mrs. Anderson walking toward her. The event coordinator looked even more stressed than before. "Sarah, there you are," Mrs. Anderson said, sitting down next to her on the bench. "Maria told me that the rehearsal went better than expected. She said you have a very beautiful way of playing." Sarah looked down at her hands. "I'm not sure I can do this, Mrs. Anderson. I haven't performed for people in years. What if I mess up and ruin everything?" Mrs. Anderson was quiet for a moment, watching the people walk by on the sidewalk. "Can I tell you something, Sarah? I've been organizing events like this for 15 years. I've seen professional musicians make mistakes, singers forget words, and dancers trip and fall. You know what? The audience always forgives mistakes if they can feel that the performer is trying their best. But these are important people," Sarah said. "They expect everything to be perfect." "Important people are still just people," Mrs. Anderson replied. "They have hearts that can be touched by beautiful music just like anyone else. Most of them came tonight because they want to help sick children, not because they want to criticize the entertainment." Sarah thought about this, but she still felt scared. What if my hands start shaking and I can't play at all? What if I have to run off the stage like I did in college? Mrs. Anderson looked at her with kind eyes. "What happened in college, Sarah? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. But sometimes talking about our fears makes them smaller." Sarah had never told anyone the full story of her worst day. But sitting on the bench in the quiet evening air, she found herself wanting to share it. "I was supposed to play a piece by Chopin," Sarah began. "It was for my junior recital. I had practiced for months, I knew every note perfectly. But when I walked onto the stage and saw all those people staring at me, I panicked." She paused, remembering the feeling of her heart racing and her hands starting to shake. "I started playing, but my hands were shaking so badly that I kept hitting wrong keys. The music sounded terrible. People in the audience started whispering to each other. I could see my professors looking disappointed. Finally, I just stopped playing and ran away." Mrs. Anderson listened without saying anything. When Sarah finished, she was quiet for another moment. "That must have been very painful for you," Mrs. Anderson said gently. "But Sarah, can I point out something? You said you started playing. Even though you were scared, you still tried. That took courage." Sarah had never thought of it that way before. She had always focused on the part where she had failed and run away. She had never considered that she had been brave enough to at least try. "The thing is," Mrs. Anderson continued, "tonight is not your junior recital. You're not being judged or graded. You're just helping 3 singers share beautiful music with people who want to help children. The pressure is completely different." Sarah nodded, but she still felt nervous. "I just wish I could be more confident, like Maria. She seems so sure of herself." "Would you like to know a secret?" Mrs. Anderson said with a small smile. "Maria was throwing up in the bathroom 20 minutes ago. She's nervous too. She told me she's worried about working with a new accompanist she's never played with before." This surprised Sarah. Maria had seemed so calm and professional during their rehearsal. "Really?" She seemed so confident. "Professional performers learn how to hide their nerves," Mrs. Anderson explained. "But they still feel scared sometimes, just like everyone else. The difference is that they've learned to perform even when they're scared." Sarah thought about this. Maybe she wasn't the only one who felt nervous about tonight. "Mrs. Anderson, can I ask you something? Why did you ask me to do this? You could have canceled the music Or found recorded songs to play instead? Mrs. Anderson smiled. Do you remember last Christmas when we had that little holiday party for the theater staff? Sarah nodded. The theater always had a small party for employees in December. You probably don't remember this, but you sat down at the piano and played some Christmas songs while people were talking and eating. It wasn't a formal performance, you were just playing softly in the background. Sarah did remember that. She had played some simple songs while people enjoyed their party. It hadn't felt like performing because no one was really watching her. Was standing near the piano that day, Mrs. Anderson continued. I heard how beautifully you played. Your music made the whole room feel warm and peaceful. People stopped their conversations just to listen. That's when I knew you had something special. Sarah was surprised. She hadn't realized anyone was paying attention to her playing that day. But that was different, Sarah said. People weren't really watching me. They were just enjoying the background music. Exactly, Mrs. Anderson said. That's the secret, Sarah. Tonight you don't have to think about the audience watching you. Just think about making beautiful background music that helps the singers share their voices. You'll be supporting them, not performing alone. This was a new way for Sarah to think about it. Instead of being the center of attention, she would be helping other people shine. What if I still make mistakes? Sarah asked. Then you make mistakes, Mrs. Anderson said simply. Professional musicians make mistakes all the time. The audience usually doesn't even notice small errors. And if they do notice, they understand that live music is never perfect. Sarah looked at her watch again. 50 minutes until showtime. She was still scared, but she was starting to feel a little bit braver. Mrs. Anderson, I want to try something. Can I go back inside and practice alone for a few minutes? I think I need to play through the songs one more time without anyone listening. Of course, Mrs. Anderson said, standing up from the bench. Take all the time you need. I'll make sure no one bothers you. Sarah and Mrs. Anderson walked back into the theater together. The main hall was filled with people eating dinner and talking, but the stage area was empty. Sarah sat down at the piano and placed her hands on the keys. She started playing Maria's song, the difficult piece that had been giving her so much trouble. But this time, instead of trying to impress anyone or play it perfectly, she just focused on the feeling of the music. She thought about the story the song was telling. A young woman asking her father to let her marry the man she loved. The music began to flow more naturally. When she came to the hard parts, Sarah didn't panic. She just played them as well as she could and kept going. Some notes were wrong, but the feeling of the song came through clearly. As she played, Sarah noticed something strange happening. Her hands were still a little shaky, but they weren't stopping her from making music. The nervousness was there, but it wasn't controlling her anymore. She finished the song and sat quietly for a moment. Then she played through Robert's song and Catherine's song. Both of them went better than before. Sarah looked up and saw that a few people from the dinner crowd had wandered closer to the stage. They were listening to her play with smiles on their faces. When she finished, they clapped softly and went back to their tables. Those people hadn't been judging her or waiting for her to make mistakes. They had just been enjoying the music. Sarah felt a small spark of confidence growing inside her chest. Maybe she could do this after all. Maybe her grandmother had been right when she said that music was about touching people's hearts. She closed the piano lid and stood up from the bench. In 35 minutes, she would walk onto this stage in front of hundreds of people. She was still scared, but she was ready to try. Sarah walked backstage to find the three singers and tell them she was ready. But first, she wanted to do one more thing. She reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was the program from her grandmother's memorial service, which she had been carrying with her for 2 years. On the back of the program, her grandmother had written a note in her shaky handwriting. Music is love made audible. Play with your heart, not your head. Sarah smiled and tucked the program back into her purse. Tonight she would try to play with her heart. Sarah found the three singers waiting in the small backstage area. They were all dressed in their performance clothes now. Maria wore a stunning black evening gown that sparkled under the lights. Robert had on a classic black tuxedo, and Catherine looked elegant in a deep blue dress. Sarah suddenly felt very plain in her simple black pants and white blouse. There you are, Maria said when she saw Sarah approaching. How are you feeling? Nervous, but ready, Sarah answered honestly. I practiced the songs again, and I think I can do this. Robert smiled at her. That's the spirit. Remember, we're all in this together. If something goes wrong, we'll just keep going and make the best of it. Catherine nodded in agreement. The audience wants us to succeed. They're not hoping we'll make mistakes. They want to hear beautiful music and help raise money for the children. Sarah appreciated their encouragement. She had been so worried about disappointing them, but they seemed genuinely supportive. Mrs. Anderson said the dinner is almost finished, Maria said, checking her makeup in a small mirror. They'll be introducing us in about 10 minutes. Sarah's heart started beating faster again. 10 minutes felt like no time at all and forever at the same time. What's the order of performances? Sarah asked, wanting to make sure she was prepared. I'm going first, Catherine said. I'll be singing Ave Maria. It's a gentle song, so it should be a good way to start the musical portion of the evening. Sarah nodded. Catherine's song was one she felt confident about. The melody was simple and beautiful, and it didn't have any of the tricky technical parts that made her nervous. Then I'll sing Music of the Night from Phantom of the Opera, Robert said. It's a popular song, so the audience will probably recognize it. This song was a bit more challenging for Sarah, but she had practiced it several times and felt reasonably comfortable with it. And I'll finish with O mio babino caro, Maria said. We'll end on a high note, literally and figuratively. Sarah took a deep breath. The most difficult song would be last. At least if she made mistakes in the easier songs first, she might be warmed up by the time they reached Maria's piece. Remember, Maria said, looking directly at Sarah, don't try to play it exactly like the sheet music. Play it the way you played it during our last practice session. That simple emotional style you found worked really well with my voice, right? Was surprised that Maria was encouraging her to play differently than the original. She had expected the opera singer to insist on technical perfection. Are you sure? Sarah asked. I know it's not as fancy as what people might expect. Sometimes the most moving music is the simplest, Maria replied. When you played it that way earlier, it made me want to sing differently too. It felt more personal, more honest. A young man wearing a headset appeared beside them. He was part of the technical crew. 5 minutes until showtime, he announced. Ms. Gonzalez, you'll all be introduced together, but then you'll perform one at a time as planned. Sarah's mouth suddenly felt very dry. She wished she had brought a bottle of water with her. Sarah, Catherine said quietly, would you like to do some breathing exercises with us? They help calm the nerves. The 4 of them stood in a circle backstage and took slow, deep breaths together. Sarah tried to focus on the feeling of air going in and out of her lungs instead of thinking about all the people sitting in the audience. Breathe in for 4 counts, Catherine whispered. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out for 4 counts. They did this several times. Sarah began to feel a little calmer, though her hands were still trembling slightly. 2 minutes, the crew member announced. Sarah could hear applause coming from the main theater. Someone was speaking into a microphone, probably Mrs. Anderson getting ready to introduce the musical performances. This is it, Robert said with a smile. Break a leg, everyone. Sarah had always thought that expression was strange. Why would anyone want to break a leg before a performance? They walked toward the side of the stage where they would make their entrance. Sarah could see the edge of the red curtain and the bright stage lights beyond it. The piano was sitting in the middle of the stage, looking bigger and more intimidating than she remembered. Through a small gap in the curtain, Sarah caught a glimpse of the audience. The theater was completely full. Hundreds of people in fancy clothes were sitting at round tables, their faces turned toward the stage. The sight made her stomach flip over. Ladies and gentlemen, Mrs. Anderson's voice came through the sound. System, we are delighted to present this evening's musical entertainment. Please welcome soprano Maria Gonzalez, tenor Robert Williams, mezzo-soprano Catherine Lee, and accompanist Sarah Chen. This was it. There was no turning back now. Maria walked onto the stage first, smiling and waving to the audience. The crowd applauded enthusiastically. Robert and Catherine followed, both looking confident and professional. Sarah hesitated for a moment at the edge of the stage. The applause seemed very loud, and the lights were brighter than she had expected. But then she remembered her grandmother's note about playing with her heart, and she forced herself to walk forward. The audience continued clapping as Sarah made her way to the piano bench. She tried not to look directly at all the faces staring at her. Instead, she focused on reaching the piano and sitting down safely. The bench felt familiar under her, and the keys looked like old friends. Sarah placed her hands gently on the piano and waited for the applause to die down. "Our first selection this evening," Mrs. Anderson announced from offstage, "will be Ave Maria, performed by Catherine Lee." The audience became quiet, and Catherine took her position next to the piano. She looked at Sarah and nodded, ready to begin. Sarah had played this song dozens of times during their practice sessions. She knew exactly how it started, with a gentle, flowing melody that would support Catherine's beautiful voice. Sarah placed her fingers on the keys and began to play the opening notes. The sound filled the theater, clear and sweet. She was surprised by how good the piano sounded. All her careful tuning work had paid off. Catherine began to sing, her voice floating over Sarah's playing like honey over warm bread. The Latin words of the prayer were familiar to many people in the audience, and Sarah could sense them settling into the music. As Sarah played, she found herself relaxing slightly. The piano responded perfectly to her touch, and Catherine's voice was strong and confident. They had practiced this song enough times that Sarah's fingers seemed to know where to go without her having to think about it. The song built to a beautiful high note from Catherine, and Sarah provided gentle support underneath. When they reached the final phrase, Sarah played the ending chords with more confidence than she had felt all evening. The audience burst into applause as soon as the last note faded away. Sarah looked up for the first time and saw people smiling and clapping enthusiastically. A few people were even wiping their eyes, moved by the beautiful performance. Catherine squeezed Sarah's shoulder gently as she acknowledged the applause. "That was perfect," she whispered. Sarah felt a small surge of pride. She had done it. She had played a complete song in front of hundreds of people without making any major mistakes. Her hands had been a little shaky at the beginning, but the music had carried her through. "Our next selection," Mrs. Anderson announced, "is Music of the Night from The Phantom of the Opera, performed by Robert Williams." Robert took his place next to the piano as Catherine moved to the side of the stage. He looked at Sarah with an encouraging smile. This song was more dramatic than the first one, with a haunting melody that Sarah had always found beautiful. She began the mysterious opening chords, creating the dark, romantic atmosphere that the song required. Robert's voice was rich and powerful as he sang about the phantom's love for Christine. Sarah found herself getting caught up in the story the song was telling. Her playing became more expressive, adding small touches that she hadn't planned but that seemed to fit perfectly with Robert's interpretation. The audience was completely silent, absorbed in the performance. Sarah realized she was no longer thinking about making mistakes or about all the people watching her. She was simply making music with Robert, helping him tell a beautiful story. When the song ended, the applause was even stronger than before. Sarah heard someone call out "Bravo" from the audience. 2 songs down, 1 to go. But the next song was the hardest one, Maria's challenging opera piece. Sarah's brief confidence began to waver again as she thought about all the difficult passages she would have to navigate. Maria approached the piano, looking radiant in her black gown. She placed one hand lightly on the piano and looked directly at Sarah. "Remember," Maria said quietly, so only Sarah could hear, "play it with feeling, not with fear. The audience is already on our side." Sarah looked out at the crowd one more time. The faces she saw didn't look critical or judgmental. They looked interested and supportive, ready to hear whatever music she and Maria would share with them. Sarah placed her hands on the keys once more, ready for the biggest challenge of the evening. "Our final selection this evening," Mrs. Anderson's voice came through the speakers, "is O mio babbino caro from Gianni Schicchi by Giacomo Puccini, performed by Maria Gonzalez." The audience shifted in their seats with anticipation. Many of them knew this was a very famous and difficult opera song. Sarah could feel the weight of their expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Maria stood beside the piano, looking calm and professional. But Sarah noticed that the singer's hands were clasped tightly together, a sign that even the experienced performer was feeling nervous. Sarah looked down at the keys and tried to remember everything they had practiced. This song started gently, with a simple melody that told the story of a young woman pleading with her father. The beginning wasn't too hard. It was the middle section, with its fast runs and complex harmonies, that had been giving Sarah trouble. She placed her fingers on the keys and began the opening notes. The melody flowed out soft and sweet, filling the quiet theater. Maria waited for exactly the right moment, then began to sing in Italian. O mio babbino caro, mi piace è bello, bello. Maria's voice was even more beautiful than during their practice sessions. Something about performing in front of an audience seemed to bring out extra richness and emotion in her singing. Sarah found herself playing with more feeling too, inspired by the beauty of Maria's voice. The first section of the song went smoothly. Sarah played the gentle melody, while Maria sang about her love for a young man and her hope that her father would let them marry. The audience was completely silent, drawn into the romantic story. But Sarah knew the difficult part was coming. Soon she would have to play the fast, decorative passages that had been tripping her up during practice. Her heart started beating faster as they approached that section. Maria's voice grew stronger and more passionate as the song built toward its climax. Sarah tried to keep up, playing the supportive harmonies underneath. When they reached the first tricky passage, Sarah took a deep breath and played it as carefully as she could. She made it through without any major mistakes, but she could feel her hands starting to shake slightly. The hardest part was still ahead. Maria sang the most emotional part of the song. Something unexpected began to happen to Sarah. Instead of focusing on her fear of making mistakes, she found herself listening to the story that Maria was telling through her voice. The young woman in the song was pleading with her father, her heart full of love and hope. Sarah began to think about her own grandmother, who had always encouraged her to follow her dreams. She thought about all the times her grandmother had told her that music was about touching hearts, not about showing off technical skills. Without really planning it, Sarah started playing with more emotion. When she reached the difficult fast passages, instead of trying to play every single note perfectly, she focused on expressing the feeling of the music. Some of the ornamental notes were simplified, but the heart of the music came through clearly. Maria seemed to sense the change in Sarah's playing. The singer's voice became even more expressive, as if Sarah's emotional piano playing was inspiring her to dig deeper into the character she was portraying. The audience was completely captivated. Sarah could sense their attention even without looking at them. The theater was so quiet that every note seemed to hang in the air like a jewel. As they moved into the final section of the song, Sarah felt something she had never experienced before while performing. Instead of fighting against her nervousness, she let it become part of the music. The slight trembling in her hands made her playing sound more human, more vulnerable. Maria's voice soared over Sarah's playing, reaching the high notes that made this song famous. But instead of sounding like a technical display, it sounded like a real person's heart crying out with love and hope. Sarah played the final accompaniment with tears in her eyes. She wasn't sure why she was crying. Maybe it was relief. Or maybe it was the pure beauty of making music with someone as talented as Maria. When the last note faded into silence, the theater remained quiet for what felt like forever. Sarah looked up from the piano keys and saw that many people in the audience were wiping their eyes. Then the applause began. It started as scattered clapping from a few people, but quickly grew into something much bigger. People began standing, up, first a few, then more, until the entire audience was on their feet clapping and cheering. Sarah had never heard applause like this. It wasn't just polite appreciation. It was genuine excitement and emotion. People were calling out, "Bravo," and "Beautiful." Some were still crying. Maria reached over and took Sarah's hand, lifting it up in the air with her own. Both women acknowledged the applause together. Sarah noticed that Maria's eyes were bright with tears too. "That was incredible," Maria whispered to Sarah over the sound of the continuing applause. I've never sung that piece with more feeling. You made me want to sing from my soul." Sarah looked out at the audience and felt overwhelmed by their response. These were the same people she had been so afraid of just hours earlier. Now they were showing her appreciation and love that she had never imagined possible. Robert and Catherine joined them on stage, adding their applause to the audience's. The four performers stood together, acknowledging the crowd's enthusiasm. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mrs. Anderson's voice came over the sound system. "Maria Gonzalez, Robert Williams, Catherine Lee, and Sarah Chen." Hearing her name announced to thunderous. Applause was something Sarah had dreamed about as a child, but had given up hoping for years ago. Now it was really happening, and it felt even better than she had imagined. The applause continued for several more minutes. Sarah saw people in the audience talking excitedly to each other, pointing toward the stage with smiles on their faces. She realized that she had helped create something special tonight, not just music, but a shared experience that had moved everyone in the room. As the applause finally began to die down, Sarah felt a strange mix of emotions. She was exhausted from the nervous energy, thrilled by the success and amazed by what had just happened. But most of all, she felt grateful. Grateful to Mrs. Anderson for asking her to help, grateful to the singers for supporting her, and grateful to her grandmother for teaching her that music was about love, not perfection. Maria squeezed Sarah's hand one more time before they prepared to leave the stage. "Sarah," Maria said quietly, "I hope you know that what happened tonight was very special. You didn't just accompany us, you helped us create magic." As they walked off the stage together, Sarah felt like she was floating. The scared, shaky piano tuner who had been hiding backstage just a few hours ago felt like a different person. She had faced her biggest fear and discovered that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. But even more than that, she had remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. It wasn't about being perfect or impressing people. It was about sharing something beautiful with others and touching their hearts. The evening wasn't over yet. There would be more celebration, more congratulations, and probably some exciting conversations about what might happen next. But for now, Sarah just wanted to savor this moment of pure joy and accomplishment. She had done it. She had really done it. Backstage was buzzing with excitement. As soon as the four performers stepped off the stage, they were surrounded by theater staff members who had been watching from the wings. Everyone was talking at once, their faces bright with amazement. "That was absolutely incredible," said the young man with the headset who had been giving them time cues. "I've worked here for 3 years, and I've never seen an audience react like that." Mrs. Anderson appeared practically glowing with happiness. She grabbed Sarah's hands and squeezed them tightly. "Sarah, I can't thank you enough," she said, her voice full of emotion. "You saved the evening, but more than that, you made it truly special. People are still talking about your performance out there." Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the praise. Part of her still couldn't believe that it had really happened. Had she really just played piano in front of hundreds of people without falling apart? "I can't believe I actually did it," Sarah said, shaking her head in wonder. "A few hours ago, I was ready to run away and hide." Maria, who was still glowing from the performance, put her arm around Sarah's shoulders. "What you did tonight wasn't just brave. It was artistic. You found your own voice at that piano. I've worked with many accompanists over the years, and what we created together was something really unique." Robert nodded enthusiastically. "When you started playing with so much emotion, it made all of us want to perform better. It's like your feeling was contagious in the best possible way." Catherine smiled at Sarah warmly. "You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place. Sometimes we get so focused on being technically perfect that we forget music is supposed to make people feel something." Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes again. These professional singers, people she had looked up to and felt intimidated by, were treating her like an equal. More than that, they were telling her that she had helped them perform better. "Excuse me, are you Sarah Chen?" Sarah turned around and saw a well-dressed older man approaching. He had silver hair and kind eyes, and he was carrying a small business card. "Yes, I am," Sarah replied, wondering who this person could be. The man smiled. and extended his hand. "My name is David Richardson. I'm a talent scout for Lincoln Center in New York City. I was in the audience tonight." Sarah's eyes widened. Lincoln Center was one of the most famous places for classical music in the world. She had dreamed of performing there when she was a student. "I have to tell you," Mr. Richardson continued, "I've been to hundreds of classical performances, but what I heard tonight was truly extraordinary. The way you played that final piece with such raw emotion while maintaining perfect support for Ms. Gonzalez, that's a rare gift." Sarah looked at Maria, Robert, and Catherine in confusion. She still felt like she was dreaming. "Mr. Richardson," Maria said, "Sarah is incredibly talented, but she's been working as a piano tuner. Tonight was actually her first time performing, in years." Mr. Richardson looked even more impressed. "That makes it even more remarkable. Natural talent like that doesn't come along very often." He handed Sarah his business card. "I'd like to talk with you about some opportunities we might have. Would you be interested in discussing a possible audition?" Sarah stared at the business card in her hands. The Lincoln Center logo was printed at the top in elegant letters. A few hours ago, she had been hiding backstage, terrified of playing for anyone. Now a talent scout was talking about auditions. I don't know what to say," Sarah stammered. "You don't have to say anything right now," Mr. Richardson said kindly. "Just think about it. When you're ready, give me a call. I think you might be surprised by what doors could open for you." After Mr. Richardson walked away, Sarah continued to stare at his business card. It felt like a piece of paper that could change her entire life. "Sarah, you look like you've seen a ghost," Mrs. Anderson said with a laugh. "This is good news. This is incredible news." "I just can't believe this is really happening," Sarah said softly. "This morning I was just tuning pianos. Tonight I'm getting job offers from Lincoln Center. It feels like someone else's life." More people began approaching their group. Several audience members had found their way backstage and wanted to congratulate the performers. Sarah found herself shaking hands and accepting compliments from people she didn't know. "Your playing moved me to tears," said an elderly woman in a beautiful pearl necklace. "I haven't been so affected by music in years." A younger couple approached, with their teenage daughter. "Our daughter is a piano student," the mother explained. "She was inspired by your performance tonight. Could we possibly get a photo with you?" Sarah agreed, still feeling bewildered by all the attention. As the family posed with her for the photo, the teenage girl whispered, "You made classical music seem so emotional and real. Usually it feels kind of stuffy to me, but tonight was different." These comments meant more to Sarah than any technical compliments could have. She realized that her biggest fear, that people would judge her harshly if she wasn't perfect, had been completely wrong. The audience had connected with her music precisely because it was honest and emotional, not because it was flawless. About 30 minutes later, when the crowd of well-wishers had finally thinned out, Sarah found herself sitting alone in the quiet backstage area. She was still wearing her simple performance clothes, but she felt like a completely different person than the one who had put them on a few hours ago. Maria found her there and sat down beside her. "How are you doing, Sarah? You look a little overwhelmed." Sarah laughed softly. "Overwhelmed is definitely the right word. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It's not a dream," Maria said gently. "You really did give a beautiful performance tonight. And that talent scout wasn't just being polite. I know David Richardson's reputation. He only approaches musicians he thinks have real potential." Sarah looked down at the business card again. "Maria, can I ask you something? How do you deal with being nervous? Even after tonight, I still feel scared about the idea of performing regularly." Maria smiled. "Can I tell you a secret? I was terrified tonight too. Working with a new accompanist I had never performed with before made me really nervous, but you know what? The nervousness actually helped our performance. It kept us both alert and emotionally open." This surprised Sarah. "Really? You seem so confident." "I've learned that being nervous and being confident aren't opposites," Maria explained. "You can feel scared and still choose to do something brave. Tonight you proved that to yourself." Sarah thought about this. She had been nervous throughout the entire performance, but she hadn't let the nervousness stop her from making music. The most important thing, Maria continued, is that you remembered something tonight that a lot of musicians forget. Music isn't about showing off how well you can play. It's about sharing something meaningful with other people. Sarah nodded. My grandmother used to say something like that. She always told me to play with my heart, not my head. Your grandmother sounds like a wise woman. Tonight you honored her advice beautifully. As they sat together in comfortable silence, Sarah began to think about what came next. For 3 years, she had been content to stay invisible, fixing pianos, and avoiding any situation that might require her to perform. But tonight had shown her that hiding wasn't the answer. She thought about the teenage girl who had said that classical music usually seemed stuffy to her. She thought about the elderly woman who had been moved to tears. She thought about how good it had felt to help Maria, Robert, and Catherine shine even brighter than they could have alone. Maybe performing didn't have to be about proving she was good enough. Maybe it could be about sharing the gift her grandmother had helped her discover all those years ago. Sarah looked at Mr. Richardson's business card one more time, then carefully placed it in her purse next to her grandmother's memorial service program. She wasn't sure what she would decide about Lincoln Center, but she knew one thing for certain. She was ready to stop hiding. Tonight had given her back something she thought she had lost forever. The joy of making music with other people. And that was worth more than all the applause in the world. The next morning, Sarah woke up in her small apartment feeling like she had experienced the most vivid dream. But when she saw her performance clothes hanging on her chair and Mr. Richardson's business card sitting on her nightstand, she knew it had all been real. She made herself coffee and sat by her window, looking out at the city street below. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday morning, but Sarah felt completely different. It was as if something inside her had been unlocked. Her phone started ringing. Sarah looked at the caller ID and saw Mrs. Anderson's name. Good morning, Sarah. Mrs. Anderson's cheerful voice came through the phone. I hope you got some sleep last night. I was too excited to sleep much myself. I slept a little, Sarah said with a smile. It all still feels unreal. Well, it's about to feel very real, Mrs. Anderson said. I've been getting phone calls all morning. The local newspaper wants to interview you. The arts magazine wants to do a feature story. And 3 different event planners have called asking if you're available to play at their functions. Sarah's coffee mug stopped halfway to her mouth. Really? People are actually calling about me? Sarah, what happened last night was special. Word travels fast in the music community. People are talking about the piano tuner who gave the most moving performance they've ever heard. After Sarah hung up with Mrs. Anderson, her phone rang again almost immediately. This time it was Maria. Sarah, I hope I'm not calling too early, Maria said. But I couldn't wait to tell you. I've been thinking all night about our performance, and I want to ask you something. What is it? Sarah asked. I have 3 more concerts coming up this month. 2 here in the city, and 1 in Philadelphia. My regular accompanist is still available, but after last night, I'd really love to work with you again. Would you be interested? Sarah felt her heart start beating faster. The idea of performing 3 more times seemed both thrilling and terrifying. Maria, I'm honored that you'd want to work with me again. But are you sure? I mean, last night worked out well, but what if I mess up next time? Maria laughed gently. Sarah, professional musicians mess up all the time. The difference is that we keep playing and the audience usually doesn't even notice. Besides, what made last night special wasn't that you played perfectly. It was that you played authentically. Sarah thought about this. The idea of performing again was scary, but it was also exciting, and working with Maria again would mean she wouldn't have to face the challenge alone. Okay, Sarah said, surprising herself. Yes, I'd love to work with you again. Wonderful. I'll have my manager send you the details. And Sarah, thank you for reminding me what it feels like to really connect with music. That afternoon, Sarah went to work at the theater as usual, but everything felt different. Theater staff members who had barely acknowledged her before now stopped to congratulate her and ask about her plans. Sarah, called out Tom, one of the lighting technicians. I heard you got a call from Lincoln Center, is that true? Sarah nodded, still feeling amazed by it herself. A talent scout was in the audience last night. He gave me his card. That's incredible, Tom said, shaking his head in wonder. You know, I always wondered why someone who worked with pianos all day never seemed to play them. Now I understand. You were just waiting for the right moment. As Sarah worked on tuning the theater's pianos, she found herself playing small melodies between adjustments. For 3 years, she had focused only on the mechanical aspects of her job. Now she remembered how much she loved the sound of a perfectly tuned instrument responding to her touch. Around 4 o'clock, Mrs. Anderson found her backstage. Sarah, there's someone here to see you, she said with a mysterious smile. Sarah looked up from the piano she was working on and saw a young woman with short blonde hair approaching. The woman looked familiar, but Sarah couldn't place where she had seen her before. Hi, Sarah, the woman said with a nervous smile. I'm Jessica Martin. I was in the audience last night. Sarah nodded politely, but she still wasn't sure why this person had come to see her. I wanted to thank you, Jessica continued. Your performance last night changed something important for me. Changed something? Sarah asked, curious. Jessica took a deep breath. I'm a piano teacher at the elementary school across town. I've been teaching for 5 years and I love working with kids. But lately, I've been feeling like I've lost touch with why I became a musician in the first place. Sarah listened carefully, sensing that this was important to Jessica. Last night when I heard you play, it reminded me that music isn't about being perfect or impressing people. It's about sharing something beautiful and meaningful. You played with so much heart that it made me remember why I fell in love with piano when I was a child. Sarah felt touched by Jessica's words. I'm glad the music meant something to you. That's not all, Jessica said, her eyes brightening. I want to ask you if you'd be willing to come to my school sometime and play for my students. Many of them think classical music is boring or too difficult. But if they could hear you play with the same feeling you had last night, I think it might inspire them. Sarah had never thought about playing for children before. The idea was both appealing and nerve-wracking. I'm not really a teacher, Sarah said hesitantly. I wouldn't know what to say to them. You wouldn't have to say much, Jessica replied. Just play for them the way you played last night. Show them that music can be emotional and real, not just technical exercises. Sarah thought about the teenage girl from the night before who had said that classical music usually seemed stuffy to her. Maybe there were other young people who felt the same way. Let me think about it, Sarah said. Can I call you in a few days? Of course, Jessica said, handing Sarah her business card. Take all the time you need, but I really hope you'll consider it. You have something special to share with the world. That evening, Sarah sat at her small upright piano at home. The same piano her grandmother had left her. She played through some of the songs from the night before, remembering how it had felt to perform them with Maria, Robert, and Catherine. As she played, Sarah thought about all the opportunities that seemed to be opening up for her. Maria's concerts, the possible audition at Lincoln Center, interview requests, and now the chance to inspire young musicians. A few days ago, her biggest concern had been whether the theater's pianos were properly tuned. Now she was facing choices that could change the entire direction of her life. She thought about her grandmother, who had always encouraged her to share her musical gifts with others. Her grandmother had never gotten to see her perform in college, and she had died before Sarah found the courage to perform again. But somehow, Sarah felt like her grandmother had been with her on that stage last night. Sarah picked up her phone and dialed the number on Jessica's business card. Hello, Jessica. This is Sarah Chen. I've been thinking about your invitation, and I'd love to come play for your students. Jessica's excited voice came through the phone. Really? That's wonderful. When would be a good time for you? How about next Friday afternoon? Sarah suggested. That will give me time to prepare some songs that might interest children. After she hung up, Sarah called Maria to ask for advice about playing for young audiences. Then she picked up Mr. Richardson's business card and stared at it for a long time. She wasn't ready to call Lincoln Center yet, but for the first time, since college, she could imagine herself performing on a big stage again. Not because she wanted to prove anything to anyone, but because she had something beautiful to share. Sarah opened the piano bench and pulled out her grandmother's memorial service program. She read the note on the back one more time. Music is love made audible. Play with your heart, not your head. Tomorrow she would start preparing for her school visit. Next week she would perform with Maria again. And someday, maybe sooner than she thought, she might be ready to take on even bigger challenges. But tonight, Sarah simply sat at her piano and played for the pure joy of making music. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. 3 months later, Sarah stood backstage at Lincoln Center preparing for the most important audition of her life. She wore the same black dress she had worn for that first performance at the charity gala, but now it felt like a lucky charm, rather than a simple outfit. So much had changed since that nervous evening at the Grand Metropolitan Theater. The school visit with Jessica's students had been a huge success. The children had been captivated by Sarah's emotional playing, and several had asked their parents if they could start taking piano lessons. Jessica had invited Sarah back twice more, and word was spreading to other schools in the area. The 3 concerts with Maria had gone beautifully. Each performance had felt more natural than the last, and Sarah's confidence had grown with every song. Music critics had started taking notice, writing reviews that praised her uncommonly expressive accompaniment and her ability to elevate every performer she works with. But it was the video that had changed everything. Someone in the audience, at that first charity gala, had recorded Sarah and Maria's performance of O mio babino caro on their phone. When they posted it online, it had spread like wildfire. Within 2 weeks, the video had been viewed by over 2 million people. The comments on the video had amazed Sarah. People from around the world wrote about how her playing had moved them to tears, how it had reminded them of loved ones who had passed away, how it had made them want to learn piano themselves. Many commented that they had never heard classical music played with such raw emotion. That video had led to Mr. Richardson calling Sarah again, this time with a specific opportunity. Lincoln Center was looking for a new staff accompanist, someone who could work with visiting artists and also perform solo concerts. The job would be a dream come true for any classical pianist. You've proven you have the talent, Mr. Richardson had told her over the phone. Now we just need to see how you handle performing on one of the world's most prestigious stages. Sarah touched the small locket around her neck, a gift from her grandmother that contained a tiny photo of the two of them sitting at the piano together. She had started wearing it to every performance as a reminder of where her love of music had begun. 5 minutes, Miss Chen, a stage manager announced. Sarah took a deep breath and walked to the edge of the stage. She could see the beautiful Avery Fisher Hall stretching out in front of her. There were about 100 people in the audience, Lincoln Center staff, board members, and a few music critics who had come to hear the pianist everyone was talking about. This was so different from that first terrifying night at the charity gala. Sarah still felt nervous, but it was a different kind of nervousness. Instead of fear that she would embarrass herself, she felt excited anticipation about sharing her music with new people. As Sarah walked onto the stage, she remembered advice that Maria had given her the week before. Don't think about impressing them. Think about telling them a story through your music. Sarah had chosen to play 3 pieces for her audition. The first was a gentle Bach prelude, something that would showcase her technical skills while remaining emotionally accessible. The second was Chopin's Raindrop Prelude, the same composer whose music had caused her to panic in college all those years ago. She had chosen it deliberately, as a way of facing that old fear directly. The third piece was her own arrangement of O mio babino caro, the song that had started this whole journey. She had created a solo piano version that captured the emotion of her accompaniment while standing alone as a complete musical statement. Sarah sat down at the magnificent grand piano and adjusted the bench. The instrument was perfectly tuned and incredibly responsive. She placed her hands on the keys and began the Bach prelude. The music flowed out clear and precise, but also warm and inviting. Sarah found herself thinking about the story Bach was telling through the mathematical perfection of his composition. Each note seemed to build on the one before it, creating a structure as beautiful as a cathedral. When she finished the Bach, there was respectful applause from the audience. Sarah could see Mr. Richardson in the front row, nodding approvingly. The Chopin piece was more challenging emotionally. This was the composer who had defeated her in college, whose music had seemed impossible for her to play in public. But as Sarah began the famous repeating note that gives the raindrop prelude its nickname, she thought about how much she had grown since that day. The piece told the story of someone caught in a storm, finding shelter, and then venturing back out, into the world. As Sarah played, she realized that was exactly what her own life had been like. She had been caught in the storm of her fear, had found shelter in her quiet work as a piano tuner, and was now venturing back out into the world of performance. The Chopin built to a dramatic climax, with thunderous chords representing the storm at its worst. Sarah played these passages with power and confidence, no longer the frightened student who had run from the stage years ago. When the piece ended with gentle, peaceful notes, several people in the audience wiped their eyes. Finally, it was time for her arrangement of O mio babino caro. This piece had become so special to Sarah because it represented everything she had learned about music over the past few months. It wasn't about showing off technical skill. It was about connecting with people through shared emotion. Sarah began the simple, beautiful melody that had become so familiar to her. But playing it alone, without Maria's voice, she discovered new things about the song. She could hear the young woman's hope more clearly, her desperate love, her faith that her father would understand. As Sarah played, she thought about her own relationship with music. For so long she had thought of performance as something that might judge her or hurt her. Now she understood that music was actually about love. Love for the composers who had created these beautiful pieces, love for the audience who came to listen, and love for the gift that allowed her to bring joy to other people. The final notes of her arrangement hung in the air like a prayer. When the sound faded completely, the audience was silent for a moment. Then they began to applaud, but it was different from the polite appreciation Sarah had expected. This was the same kind of enthusiastic response she had received at the charity gala, genuine, emotional, heartfelt. Several people in the audience stood up, including Mr. Richardson. The applause continued for several minutes, with people calling out, "Bravo!" and "Beautiful." As Sarah acknowledged the applause, she looked up at the ornate ceiling of Lincoln Center and thought about how far she had come. 6 months ago, she had been hiding backstage, afraid to let anyone hear her play. Now she was performing at one of the most prestigious concert halls in the world. When the applause finally died down, Mr. Richardson approached the stage with a big smile on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced to the small audience, "I think we've just witnessed something very special." Sarah Chen, that was an extraordinary audition. Sarah walked to the edge of the stage to speak with Mr. Richardson and the other Lincoln Center staff members. Her heart was still beating fast, but it was from excitement rather than fear. "Sarah," Mr. Richardson said, "I've heard hundreds of auditions over the years, but rarely have I heard someone play with such genuine emotion while maintaining such technical skill. The board and I would like to offer you the position." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. "Really? You mean it?" "We mean it completely," said an elegant woman who introduced herself as the artistic director. "Your ability to connect with audiences while supporting other artists is exactly what we've been looking for. Plus, we think your story will inspire many young musicians who struggle with performance anxiety." Over the next hour, Sarah met with various Lincoln Center staff members to discuss the details of her new position. She would work as an accompanist for visiting artists, but she would also have opportunities to give solo recitals and educational performances for schools and community groups. "There's one more thing," Mr. Richardson said as their meetings were wrapping up. "We'd like your first solo concert to be next month. We're planning to call it Music from the Heart, and we want you to play the same pieces you performed today, plus anything else you'd like to share." Sarah could hardly believe what she was hearing. Her own solo concert at Lincoln Center? It seemed impossible, but everything that had happened over the past few months had seemed impossible at first. 2 weeks later, Sarah was back at the Grand Metropolitan Theater for a special performance. Mrs. Anderson had organized an evening to celebrate Sarah's success and to raise more money for the children's hospital. Maria, Robert, and Catherine were all performing again, and Sarah would accompany them before giving a short solo set. As Sarah prepared backstage, she thought about how different this felt from that first terrifying night. She was still nervous. She probably always would be before performing, but now she knew that nervousness was just part of the process. "Ready for another magical evening?" Maria asked, appearing beside Sarah with a warm smile. "I think so," Sarah replied. "It's funny. 6 months ago, I thought my performing career was over before it really began. Now I can't imagine doing anything else." "You know what I think happened?" Maria said thoughtfully. "I think you stopped trying to be perfect and started trying to be honest.